Hello again, and welcome to the 295th consecutive program that we are so proud to call Forum for a Better Understanding. Now, usually what we do is have an interfaith discussion, as you saw from the lead-in promo, but today we've decided to have a forum around a great person and around a whole literature. We're going to be talking about Don Quixote, Cervantes, and how all of this has become a worldwide phenomenon, still relevant, still pertinent, still very, very important after 400 years. We're so glad to have two very special guests who love Cervantes, who have dedicated in different ways their lives to Don Quixote and his message as professors and as writers. To my left, I have Luis Quiroz, who translated his interest by compiling and editing a very beautiful book called Cervantes y Don Quixote en Bolivia. And to his side, we have a professor at California State University, Fresno, Zapata Whelan, who happens to have earned her PhD at UCLA and has a real interest in comparative literature. And we're so glad that we have guests who want to tell us why Don Quixote is so important. But I want to begin with asking both of them where it was that they first had any interest in Cervantes and his work.
Well, before I answer this beautiful question, I would like to thank you and the channel for giving us this wonderful opportunity to share our passion for Don Quixote. It started when I was a teenager. I read Don Quixote. What impressed me the most was the fact that he was a great lover and a very idealistic one and very romantic. At that age, it fit my feelings. And also his tremendous quest for justice. And it lingered for a long time.
Carol, what was your experience?
Well, mine is a little different. It's a little less academic. My mother was a professor of literature and still is in an amateur way, although she's retired, but she's always reading. And she and my father were always talking about Cervantes and Don Quixote, so Don Quixote was almost like a relative to me. And as a child, I thought that Don Quixote was a real person and was an uncle or some distant relative. They were always quoting him and quoting Cervantes. So my interest is very familial in Don Quixote.
And what we have are some pictures, I think, of just how relevant Don Quixote was for you. Street signs, stamps, currency, all these things are so real to a family that lives with this type of an understanding of life.
Yes, these are street signs that are, again, inspired by Cervantes and Don Quixote. And it's extraordinary because one of the central themes of Don Quixote, again, is illusion and reality, truth and history, fiction and the real world. And Don Quixote becomes a real force in the world and not just a fictional character, and to the point where you have people using stamps and mailing letters inspired by the images and the values of Cervantes and Don Quixote. So these are really extraordinary.
And even money, which is really, you mean even on money you're going to see a writer or a fictional person.
And on airplanes too. Iberia has authors on the sides of the plane. So you have this fictional reality that comes into the world, and it's just an extraordinary result of something that took place 400 years ago, over 400 years ago in Cervantes' writing.
Luis, where did this lead you, this initial interest? Where did it take you?
Well, to teaching Don Quixote eventually. I had a choice either to teach Latin American literature or Peninsular. I chose Peninsular, and it was a wonderful choice because I happen to be from La Paz, Bolivia, and while teaching, I found out that Cervantes wanted to be the mayor of La Paz. And so this led me also to know more about Don Quixote, I visited the 50 capital provinces in Spain, plus 12 very beautiful, quaint towns. And also I followed the route of Don Quixote, the famous route of Don Quixote. And I did it in a rented car, which had a standard shift. And I wasn't used to it.
Oh,
and
boy.
boy, was I ever jumping up and down whenever I stalled, and it was a jolting experience. And I felt like Don Quixote on Rocinante in any case. So it was all providential, because it just melted the whole thing. It jilted.
It became your career.
Exactly.
Carol, what about you?
Well, this is something similar with my family. We went to Spain, all of us together, and we were in Toledo, and which is frequently mentioned throughout Don Quixote. And there was a little silversmith shop. Toledo is famous for the silver, and my son put on the attire of a knight, and my daughter knighted him with a sword. And so it's really a beautiful image, and again, reminds me of what goes on in Don Quixote. So it's just...
Now, speaking of images and the books that these wonderful professors have read and written, we've got something right in front of us. There is nothing, I don't think, as interesting as Picasso's Don Quixote, because you kind of like see in one picture the Rocinante, you see Don Quixote, you see Sancho Panza, you see the windmills, you see his lance, you see an old, skinny old guy. Oh, it's a fantastic image that Picasso has given us, obviously, from Cervantes. And then we have 3 books, of course, and I wonder if Carol could say something about the Ingenioso Hidalgo, which is your book.
Right. This book actually, again, going with the family tradition, my father brought this book to me from Spain, and this was a book in celebration of the 400 years of the original publication of Don Quixote. And it's a book that has extraordinary images, history, introduction, all types of paintings inspired by Don Quixote. It talks about the movies inspired by Don Quixote. It's an extraordinary tribute to Cervantes, and in celebration of the 400 years of the publication. So again, for me, this is a special book because my father brought it to me, and again, my father and my mother introduced me at a very young age to someone I thought was a relative in the family.
And Luis, the middle book is yours. You compiled this book. Tell us about it.
Well, this book, believe it or not, is a rejected sabbatical project. And it was rejected because when I started to submit my request, I only found 4 authors and 4 books, or 4 works. And I submitted with that, which was the only thing I had. And obviously, unfortunately, it was rejected. But then, thanks to my faith in God, thanks to the example of Don Quixote, after my dismay was over, I started regrouping myself, and I began to write letters to all the newspapers, to all the libraries in La Paz,
Oh, my.
in Bolivia, actually. I started requesting recommendations, and finally I resubmitted the proposal with a file of 80 pages. And in addition, I also submitted all the requests I had for books from Bolivia literature from through the interlibrary loan. And so it amounted to that big of a volume.
And what actually, in the book now, what becomes the objective of your compilation of these wonderful Bolivian writers?
Well, the objective was to show the presence of Don Quixote in Bolivian literature. And going through the contents, the table of contents, you can see that there are novels, plays, poems, short stories, There are essays, articles, speeches, conferences, all based on Don Quixote, and that's the compendium. And you have a greatest variety of reading and levels of reading too.
Now I have Carol, please.
If I may say, it's such a wonderful project what Luis has done, and so close to my heart, and very moving, and for so many reasons. And one of these is that I feel that you have done something that is very Quixotesco, very in the sense that you have overcome an impossible obstacles, and that's what Don Quixote inspires in all of us. So it's a beautiful tribute for Luis to overcome all of these obstacles to present this book that is a dialogue between Don Quixote and Cervantes and Bolivian writers and Bolivian artists, and this is a dialogue that's universal in Cervantes that inspires, again, people across time to speak back to him and to speak back to Don Quixote and to continue a conversation through time. So bless you for this. Thank you. Also for the important element of faith that is a part of this book, and that shows that whatever the obstacle, whatever the windmill in front of us, if we have faith and persistence and a noble target, that we can achieve these things. So this.
Thank you. Thank you.
So for both of you, I have this very interesting question. In a nutshell, in summary, who is Cervantes and who is Don Quixote? Briefly, Luis, the essence.
Yeah, well, Cervantes and Don Quixote are two in one. Don Quixote has suffered as many trials and tribulations and injustices as Cervantes did. So while writing Don Quixote, what Cervantes did is just write his autobiography, but an autobiography that's filled with love, with faith, with a sense of justice, with honor, and no resentment, no hatred. And that's what makes it so incredibly beautiful. A man who has suffered so much and who has no ill feelings for anything in the world.
Carol.
I would have to basically repeat everything that Luis has just said, and the fact that Cervantes wrote during a very difficult time. There was so much conflict. You had the different religions fighting, which, and again, carries over to our century, and it's very current what's going on. And you have the three major religions in conflict, and yet Cervantes brings everything together with love and faith and shows that the way to combat a misunderstanding and differences of belief is through a frail old man who fights windmills and brings the world together through the centuries. So it's just an extraordinary thing. And I do believe that also Cervantes and Don Quixote are the same. And one more thing that I tell my students that's so, not just that Cervantes represents Spain and Hispanic tradition, carrying over also to Latin America, the very essences of what make us Hispanic, but also, again, the universal aspects of Don Quixote and the universal values of love and faith and honor and fighting injustice, and that the book itself is like a mirror. So the best literature in the world reflects us back to ourselves, and this is what Don Quixote does in Cervantes.
We have to take a break now, but don't go anywhere, because in 1 minute we'll be back with Luis and Carol to tell us more about their love for Don Quixote.
KNXT thanks all its loyal viewers and respected businesses who have supported your Catholic television station. Now you can support KNXT with program underwriting by having your name, your company's name, or organization associated with your favorite program. Detailed information about you or your company will appear before and after each program or day part you select. Keep the quality and spiritual message alive and make a difference. Call 559-488-7440 today or go online at knxt.tv to find out more about program underwriting on KNXT.
Welcome back to our second episode now on Don Quijote de la Mancha and Cervantes, the author, Miguel de Cervantes. 400 years old, but ever young. We have two professors who are telling us how their own interest as young people has become a career and that they enjoy so much sharing this. Now, what I wonder at this point, what would be great, is why would someone, Luis and Carol, be interested at this point in history, so different we think, and yet you just said a minute ago, so similar. Why is this book still eternally relevant?
Well, because it portrays mankind as it is, with all its foibles, virtues, shortcomings, with all the accomplishments, failures. It's a portrait of humanity. And Don Quixote, in Bolivia, when we were doing reviews about the book, they asked me, what nationality would you adhere to Don Quixote? I said, he's universal.
Nice.
He belongs to the world, simply because his ideals are everybody's.
Carol.
I mean, I consider Cervantes, again with Shakespeare, the two greatest writers of all time. So I don't feel that I can add too much to all of the tradition of what's been added about what Cervantes means in the world. But I'll give you just a recent example. And this is, again, he's in movies, he's in music. It continues. We had a performance here, Man of La Mancha in the Valley recently. I know that was something wonderful that you, Jim, attended. But there are themes, and there was a recent article that it was in just a popular magazine that one young writer wrote about how Cervantes is still vibrant and alive today and the conflicts that are going on in the world today. You have, for example, the fight against the windmills. And there are so many ways to interpret the windmills, and the windmills can represent, again, like a mirror to whoever is reading the book can project their own concerns and historical issues onto this windmill situation. And one of my students thought that it was interesting that Cervantes was that Don Quixote, and we confuse Don Quixote and Cervantes because we start to think they're the same person, that Don Quixote is charging the windmills, and in some ways, this is sort of a comment on Don Quixote, how Cervantes sees Don Quixote, and he sees him as an alter ego. He's a little bit critical of Don Quixote. He's not always saying that Don Quixote is doing everything wonderfully and right, and he makes fun of Don Quixote. He mocks him a little bit. He says that at one point that if he had any brains left in his head, the sun would have melted them. And so when he's charging the windmills, it can be interpreted in many different ways, and the windmills can be something fighting against the powers, as Luis was talking about this, the windmills churning up power, and Don Quixote fighting against the powers of injustice and the things that are evil. On the other hand, you can also see Cervantes as making a comment on Don Quixote perceiving something in a way that is wrong. So one of my students, and I found this extraordinary, saw that the windmills could represent the extreme fanaticism of the Islamic, the young men who flew the planes into the towers, which is a very different sort of inverted way of looking at this. But again, sort of a comment on fanaticism and extremism and not upholding the ideal values of a faith. And so I thought that was fascinating. And that's, again, why you can see Don Quixote, read it, it's current. You can apply it to current events in history.
Now, Luis, there are 5 pictures that you have been able to pick that were part of your beautiful book that kind of like answer the question, how would you characterize Don Quixote? Or at least, how is it possible to see him represented through Bolivian artists? So maybe if we show those slides and you get to tell us how Romero has really captured something very exciting. Let's see one of those slides.
Yeah, there we have Don Quixote stopping the power of the government, represented by the soldier, well equipped, and the 3 dogs, attacking the marching of the people behind Don Quixote. So this is the fight for justice. Here, Don Quixote expressing his tremendous failure, but accepting the power of faith. And in the other one is even more graphic. He's with his rosary. And in fact, he is called the man of faith by Rubén Carrasco de la Vega, who is a very, very famous philosopher who has a very beautiful article there. So he's a man of faith, a man of justice, a man of love, a man of courage. And here, you see, the power of his sword is not as much as the power of his word. Yeah. But now that the sword is broken, I only have to trust on my faith, he says. And this other one is also the innocence. You know, a crazy person as a child, they always tell the truth. And then here, his innocence is manifested by those soldiers that are flying over, completely armed. And Don Quixote asks, I wonder if they are there to protect us. Beautiful portrayal of Cervantes' inner feelings there.
This is an interesting thing, too, Luis, that you were saying about the power of the word and the power of the sword. And Cervantes was a man of the written word, of the pen, and of the sword. And so an interesting comment, too, on this is that there are historians who say that the Americas were conquered not by violence, by the power of the word. And this is what the Spaniards, again, ultimately used, which for better or for worse, and things that went well or didn't go well, was that the power of the word was what made the difference in establishing another civilization. Mm-hmm. But I won't get into all that.
But another, you see, going about the word is the power of God's word, because the missions, which I happened to visit also in one of my sabbaticals, all the 21 missions in California, and I was fascinated by the way they covered all the area in equidistant distances, that the missions are an impressive accomplishment based on faith.
We are closing, unfortunately, our conversation, but there's one question that I think we have some images to illustrate. The question would be to Carol, first of all, to whom would you recommend to start reading Don Quixote? And then Luis, because you've got some things that are actually from your beautiful book.
Yes, there are some illustrations of children's books, and I would recommend that this would be a beautiful book to start reading as a child, because the idea of the real world, the imaginary world, the intersection of the two, and how, again, we project ourselves onto the world and we make ideas become real, but they have to start inside us as ideas. And again, the power of the word, and I would like to emphasize the power of the written word, because I want to rewind a little bit to what I said about historians saying that the new world was conquered by the old world through the power of the written word. And it was, again, for better or for worse. And I'm not going to touch on the things that went wrong, but the idea that the written word is one of the most powerful weapons we have against injustice, against poverty, against any of the traditional ills that humanity has had to cope with and fight with. And this is exemplified in Cervantes and in Luis's book also, the power of the written word. So that's something that I wanted to stress. And if you give children, again, the written word, you help them start to develop in their way to education with what better teacher than Cervantes?
One thing we could show as we conclude a little bit, we have a few minutes, but I think we have some children's books that are going to remind us that all over the world, not just in Spanish language, there are wonderful, wonderful books for children. And I think Luis is going to help us appreciate how it could be useful with people like Boy Scouts, at how important this could be. Besides this, we have paintings, because in world art, there is a tremendous interest in the the famous Don Quixote in so many different ways. And finally, there are so many illustrations that have become part of our own way of seeing the world. The windmill again becomes very clear to us in the corner, but there are so many images of Don Quixote in world consciousness. It's almost like an archetype. And finally, I think we want to let Luis tell us, to get the book, what would one need to do? We have a graphic that's going to help us know how to order your book.
Yeah, it's you can see there the information. Something I wanted to point out is that the proceeds, a great percentage of the proceeds of the book will go to help the abandoned children in Bolivia. There are so many, and they are using empty niches in this cemetery to sleep in, challenging the cold weather.
You know, we only had 28 minutes to share 400 years of life that Don Quixote has given us through the pen of Miguel de Cervantes. We want to congratulate the world for keeping that story alive. It's almost like a biblical text. It's something that has a meaning at the time, but has had an increased understanding and has become, as we saw from our professors, eternally relevant. Students at university with Carol and the many, many readers who have read the book of Dr. Quiroz, all of us can benefit. And I ask all of us to please find a copy of Don Quixote and to read it and to share it with our families. God bless.